David, I had something. This is an existential crisis type of question here. I came across the meme on the internet today, and I just got to ask you, what you think about this?
Is it do or do not? There is no try.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's a side-by-side picture of Aaron Donald and Derrick Henry, two very, very large human beings that could probably snap both of us in half at the same time.
Quite
like
possibly
a bundle
some of the
twigs.
most dangerous athletic people that we've ever seen in our lives.
Yes, their muscles have muscles. Okay, so here's the question from the meme. You're offered $1 million to meet one of these players on the goal line. Would you rather be a running back trying to get past Aaron Donald or a defender trying to stop Derrick Henry? Answer, let's talk.
I mean, I always defer to offensive because at least before the ball snapped, you know where you're going. At least you know where you're going. And if you know where you're going, you know your threat vectors. And if you know your threat vectors, you can limit the amount of damage you take at any given time.
But this guy takes up 6 of the 7 threat vectors and has arms bigger than your entire torso.
Let's play the alternative. You're the free safety crashing down on the 1 yard line, and you want to meet, let's call a spade, the safest tackle you can perform on Derrick Henry is going for his knees. By the way, which are firing like a 6-cylinder piston and not with any less ferocity, mind you. And you're supposed to throw your head down there and catch that viciousness right to your face mask.
No, David, you're supposed to tackle face mask up. Everybody knows that's proper form.
Dane, okay, face mask up, which exposes your chin. You want me to catch one of Derrick Henry's knees to my chin? You can go ahead and fuck yourself. My career's over.
I don't want you to get your spinal cord severed by getting a knee to the back of the neck. You all look like
Mortal Kombat when you brutalize somebody and uppercut their spinal column out of their skull. Like that's what you'd look like if you cut a Derrick Henry. So yes, 1,000 times over, I'm clearly the running back, and at least at the
you'd rather try to get past Donald than have to go tackle Henry.
At the point of no return, I could at least dive at his knees and try to get lower than him, and maybe squeak the ball across the goal line as to avoid the brute force of a direct hit.
I don't think this question is asking or cares whether or not you're going to score or stop a score.
Oh, so it's just
which
impact.
Which one of these huge human beings do you want to get hit by?
Well, would you rather die by a bullet to the head or by sitting under an atomic bomb? Which one do you prefer? It's like, well, they're both going to kill me. Like, yeah, we get that, but like, which one though? Like, I guess the atomic bomb, because at least it's got a better finish to it than
Yes, I think a rare occurrence has occurred on this podcast where we agree. The way I was thinking about it is I think the same thing as yours. If you are running at Aaron Donald, there is always that chance that you juke him out. And so you never have to make contact.
Or you let what happens.
Yeah, right. Either way. But if you flip the roles, just as you can avoid contact with Aaron Donald, if you somehow get lucky with a good juke, the whole purpose of going after Derrick Henry is to make contact.
Yeah.
You have to hit that freight train. You have to stop
his momentum.
Yeah.
Like, you've got the momentum going into the Donald shot. You don't have the momentum going into the Henry shot. That's my whole point.
You can't play the whole Dion, it's a business decision thing at the 1 yard line, because if you just avoid the contact with Henry, he's scoring. So yeah, I agree with you. I think we take our chances in the off chance that we're able to juke out Aaron Donald.
Or just catch like one of his forearms to our throat while he tackles us on the 1 yard line, as opposed to getting our helmet knocked back to the 20 with our cabezas still in it.
All right. Well, now that we've solved that, I mean, I'm pretty sure that's good for like world hunger. energy scarcity, and climate change all at once. We solved a lot of world problems by answering that question.
I feel like, but by the way, if you're a listener and you feel heavily, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, if you feel heavily about this.
If you feel passionate about this and want to chime in, please do so on any of our given comment sections, on any of our given podcast sketches. And with that, Dane, do you want to jump in?
I think we should. Welcome to Weapons of Meme Destruction podcast episode 47, which can be found at wmdpodcast.com/47. You can find it on YouTube, any of your podcast catchers, but also link up with us on our social medias. We have Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Just Google Weapons of Meme Destruction and you will be able to find us. David.
Unless we're getting shadow banned.
Today we're talking about something that I wouldn't say reluctant to talk about, just because I think we talked about in the last couple episodes. Like, we think pretty much everybody's getting COVID fatigue.
Oh,
it's like you're hearing about it from every.
This is COVID adjacent.
Yes, this is COVID adjacent. It's probably it's very COVID close kissing cousins.
We aren't going to make it about COVID. We're going to make it about the people that made the decisions during COVID that affected our lives so drastically, right?
Yeah. Now,
and by people, I mean one people.
Well, I wouldn't say one people. It's just that he, as the figurehead for the regime, is kind of, cut the snake off at the head kind of deal. It's not that we're saying that he's responsible for every policy at every level of government, but Fauci was the figurehead that basically steered the ship of the United States COVID response.
And remember, his big thing was like he wasn't with any party. He had no political ties. Therefore, he could be
he was an objective man of science.
Correct.
Is what we were told.
Correct.
Now, a couple points that we wanted to make about this, because we want to first at the outset say that we're not going to do exactly what our political opponents, so to speak. It doesn't matter if they're left or right.
Flip out.
They're either pro Fauci or they're on our side of the fence, where we're at least Fauci skeptical, if not anti. Now, they're going to say that we think the emails are a smoking gun, right? I've seen this on a lot of different places, them asserting the negative, saying the emails are not a smoking gun and here's what proves it. And then they go into some big, long, word salad of why it's not a smoking gun. Now, we're not saying it's a smoking gun. Some people might. We're not. There's other important questions to ask, and that's what we're going to get to in this episode.
This is just a means to qualify and quantitate actions made and decisions made by a person that was supposed to be objective and just looking out for our truth, and to come to a conclusion whether or not they truly were with the revision of his actions.
Yeah. And so on that smoking gun point, I just want to just kind of as an analytical tool or framework when you are consuming media or, you hear opinions from other people, just kind of employ this analytical tool to see if they're trying to manipulate you. So by saying the emails are not a smoking gun, this is what's called gaslighting. And gaslighting is basically trying to point out to you something that you think, kind of proves that you're insane. It's another way of saying you're a conspiracy theorist, whatever. So the reason why it's gaslighting.
Would it be similar to straw manning? Is gaslighting similar to straw manning? I have such hard time with straw manning.
Not really. Straw manning is when somebody gives you an argument, you prop up the weakest manifestation of that argument and you attack that instead of what they actually said.
And you use that as like instead of boxing him, you're hitting a punching bag that has no actual legs or anything.
You're doing the exact opposite of what we try to do on this podcast. Is we try to do the opposite of that, which is some people call it steel manning. So taking whatever your argument is,
your most virulent argument.
yeah, and strengthen it up as much as you can, grant all of the premises, make it as strong as possible, and then argue against that. But yeah, straw manning is the opposite. You take the weakest version of that person, what you think that person's saying, you're asserting it as what they're absolutely saying, and then arguing against that.
And gaslighting is taking your argument and saying that it's invalid from the start.
Yeah, and there's something wrong.
There's nothing to it.
Yeah, like you're a little crazy for thinking X, Y, or Z.
Right.
Now, there's a couple reasons why this is an example of gaslighting and why it's a ridiculous argument. The first one is that it's a composition fallacy. So let's say 50% of the country is anti-Fauci, and let's say 1% of that 50% says, absolutely, emails are a smoking gun, can't convince me otherwise, smoking gun, smoking gun, smoking gun. To then say that that small portion of the total anti-Fauci crowd is exemplary of the entire crowd, and to say that everybody thinks that it's a smoking gun, that's what's called a composition fallacy. You take a tiny constituent part and what they say, the way this pans out in foreign policy a lot, you take the most radical group and you say, everybody who is in the close Venn diagram proximity of this radical group believes what the radical group believes, right? It's nonsense in that context, and it's nonsense in this context, because we told you at the outset, we're not here to assert that the emails are a smoking gun.
Again, it kind of sounds like the Mueller report to me. It kind of sounds the same, conspiratorial. It's okay to be conspiratorial when you're on their side. Like that the Russians hacked Facebook and then hacked the machines that got him elected. But then all of a sudden, when your boy gets elected, and then all of a sudden the other side starts saying that you hacked the machines, that your boy hacked the machines. That's erroneous. That's the big lie. Oh my God,
Yeah.
That's what led to January 6th. Like, you see, this is a small microcosm that just happened within the span of, a year, and they expect us to forget it.
David, are you suggesting there's a double standard?
There might be. I don't know. I'm starting to catch on to it. I'm a slow feller. I'm a slow learner, even slower than a slow feller. So I'm starting to catch on to these subtle nuances.
Yeah. So here's the next reason why it's gaslighting. So in addition to it being a composition fallacy, it completely disregards again, using my analogy of maybe 1% thinks it's smoking, the other 49 don't. Doesn't matter what the percentage are. But the people that don't think it's a smoking gun can have a valid question about the emails. And those valid questions would actually be a combination of questions. Would be, what did Fauci and the rest of the decision makers know? When did they know it? What actions were taken or inactions were not taken? And why? Why was this action taken based on what they know at this point in time? That whole picture is going to take some time. This is over 3,000 pages of emails. They have not been fully synthesized in a way that lays out in a clean chronological respect what they knew, when they knew it, what they did about it, and why.
And this isn't just some law that they're going to pass in the Senate, that they can just have their constituents read over it and just blindly vote whatever the hell their college intern tells them how to vote to fit their party narrative. This is something that actually affected your life.
Yeah. Like, they convinced governors to act like miniature kings and basically rule their states with an iron fist, completely shut down businesses, deem entire swaths of people non-essential. If you're Andrew Cuomo, kill 10,000 more old people than, maybe would have happened absent your
And then before
policies.
you find out, try to write a book about it.
Yeah, and win an Emmy for said book.
Right.
So what? And again, these were emails between Fauci and his colleagues. So we're not saying that Fauci is the entire regime, but again, he's emblematic as the figurehead of the regime for basically all of the decision process that went into the COVID response in this country and how destructive it was, which was completely preventable in terms of the lives destroyed. We've talked many times on the show about the extra lives lost to, deaths of despair, things like that. These were all real concerns that needed to be considered as the policies were instituted. And if the emails show that those points were brought up and they were either ignored or dismissed, I think that's a rather important inquiry to have. That doesn't mean that proves in and of itself a smoking gun, but that's an important thing we deserve answers to.
And again, and I don't want to make too big of a milestone out of this because it was a small thing at the time, and it relatively is a small thing now. But when Fauci first came out and said that you don't have to wear masks, masks don't help, and then comes out a month later and says, okay, masks do help. I lied to you, but I lied to you because there were more important people than you that I wanted to protect before you went out and bought up all the masks so that they wouldn't have any protection. So therefore, albeit he did it for altruistic reasons in his head, sure, he still lied to the American people for a hidden agenda. So this is not too far gone from the truth that he might have known more than he let on and was unwilling to share it at said time. That's all I'm saying. Once you slip up once, then you're not infallible because you've already fallibled.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And listen, the reason, or the third reason why you can, be pretty much guaranteed that they're just trying to gaslight you is think about what they're saying when they're saying the emails are not a smoking gun. They are telling you that they definitively know. They absolutely
before they've read it,
know for a fact that it's not a smoking gun, just like they're telling you believe that it is a smoking gun. They said, you can't know that. It doesn't say that, yada, yada, yada. Now, I said this just a second ago, and this really drives the point home. It's over 3,000 pages that have only been out for, I think, a little over a week by this recording. Nobody on either the pro or the anti-Fauci side has completely synthesized these emails. And what I mean is building out that chronological timeline of what they knew, when they knew it, what actions they took, and why. Until that maybe that entire global picture, when that's actually laid out in a coherent format, we'll be able to look at that and say, maybe the whole thing in total is a smoking gun and not one little instance that was emailed on one day in March. Maybe that will be the case, but that hasn't been done yet. So for them to assert absolutely definitively that it's not a smoking gun, they are basically assuming for themselves an intimate knowledge of the totality of the circumstances that they absolutely will not and are ex ante dismissing in their opponents. So at very least, they're hypocrites.
Slightly disingenuous?
Yes. Very, very disingenuous. That's a perfect word for what it is. And I mean, think about what they're trying to do. They're trying to say, if you read these emails, then you, by proxy, believe they're a smoking gun. Therefore, you're kind of a kook. And so we don't even need to hear you out. Where did they deploy that in this story? Oh, yeah. About a year ago, they were calling everybody a kook for even considering the lab leak theory, that the virus originated in a lab and escaped. And now, even Fauci himself is saying, maybe we should look into this. I think the lab leak might be something we should look into.
That's funny because I think from what I've heard on some of the people that have made it thus far is that Fauci's implicated in a lot of the connections to said Wuhan lab.
Right. He might be, and I don't know because...
And again, at this time of the recording, we don't know for sure and nothing is verified. So we can't say it.
Right.
But that's why I said, from what I've heard, as an opinion, I've heard that there is a correlation between Fauci and this particular Wuhan gain-of-function lab.
Yes, and whether that is borne out in the emails themselves, we don't know, because actually the email that we're getting ready to quote is focusing on something different from that. I just bring up the point to say they automatically shut down all debate on some subjects last year that now they're saying, maybe we should take a second look at. And they did it largely by discrediting anybody who was willing to consider that, in this case, the lab leak theory, and, basically by painting them as a kook, a conspiracy theorist, yada, yada, yada. So that's the tactic. And when they say not a smoking gun, they're trying to equate you with, you're a little kooky. It doesn't really say what you think it says. Therefore, you're automatically discredited before we've even looked at the emails in intimate detail. So, again, pay close attention to what they say and how they say it and how they're using it to manipulate, the discussion, and then decide for yourself whether or not what they're arguing is legitimate or, again, in this case, they're just trying to gaslight you. So, we wanted to read one of the emails. It's kind of lengthy. It's 4 paragraphs, but I do want to read it in total. It won't take that long because this is just one email that we think is emblematic of the personality trait of Fauci individually and why the regime did what it did, throughout this last year. And so I'm going to start with the email, and this is all a direct quote until I say end quote. So, quote, I wanted to convey an idea I had with regard to the coronavirus. It seems to me that trying to contain the virus, as we are doing at present, will be futile, since the virus can be present for many days without a person having any symptoms. You would literally need to test everyone at the same time to determine who has it, which is an impossible task. I have a different thought. We know that the virus is especially dangerous for the old and or immunosuppressed. In my opinion, we should be focusing all of our efforts on keeping that group from becoming infected. To do so, that group should be encouraged to self-isolate, to limit their social interactions, and other groups should be instructed to avoid them. Sort of a reverse quarantine idea. All testing would be done within those groups, and all groups would also be encouraged to continue with the hygienic suggestions they've already received. The problem right now is that the media has created a panic. Last night, my wife and I went to a local Whole Foods, and many of the shelves were empty, and healthy younger people were wearing masks. The message is not getting out that the virus is almost solely dangerous to the elderly and immunosuppressed. Why aren't the demographics being released? That in itself could calm many people. With my suggestion, exposures to them would be diminished, significantly reducing the number of deaths, as well as the potential impact on hospitals. Any person outside of that group that was severely affected could be identified and treated. Quarantining otherwise healthy people outside of those groups who finally demonstrate symptoms, like the NBA players, is ridiculous. They are likely to get the sniffles and have also already spread the virus. As long as they're not spreading it to the endangered group, we should not worry about it. In sum, we need to isolate the vulnerable and realize that the mortality rate for people outside that group is likely lower than the flu. Of course, while this occurs, we are working on finding treatments and vaccines, but sending home workers who have next to no likelihood of being significantly impacted by this virus is ridiculous. The virus hits hardest the oldest and infirm, 2 groups that are most likely not to be even in the workforce. To me, the solution is a lot simpler than what is being tried right now and is much more likely of success. To everyone besides the endangered group, this virus is literally less dangerous than the flu. There is no reason that anyone outside of the endangered group should have any concern at all, and we need to make that clear. Please let me know what you think.
And before you get into that,
end quote, sorry.
And before you get into that, I just want to note that what has the big thing been since the vaccines came out around January? What have they all been saying? The elderly aren't getting it anymore. Now it's the youthful ones. The young are going into the hospitals now. I've never really looked further into the statistics, I've got to be honest, but wouldn't that just be something that the most at risk for this have already gotten the vaccine? But it just so happens that at that same moment that the ones that he just said were safe from the virus are now getting sick. So now we need to push a younger group that's not at risk, as per that note, to get the vaccine. So what would that say about them and their coalescence with the vaccine? It would seem the timing is a little convenient to me. That's all I'll say.
Well, now, I intentionally didn't start reading that email, or I did start reading that email intentionally without giving you the date, who from, who to, the response, all that kind of stuff, because I just wanted you to hear the email exactly for what it was. And we're going to bring up a point that we've brought up in previous episodes to kind of indicate to you just how important that is. But the pertinent details about the email. Now, that email was written to Fauci in March 14th of 2020. Okay, just before the lockdowns really started picking up. And it was written to him by somebody, or at least an expert in the field that was trying to, urge a different path, so to speak. Now, what was Fauci's response to that long thought out email? 5 words. Thank you for your note. That's it. So from March until October, 7 months later, none of that advice was even shared with the American people. None of it was discussed. None of it clearly acted upon, because the exact opposite was done.
In fact, I'd say the
of what they
narrative
were
was
calling
quite to the
for.
contrary. The narrative was quite to the contrary. That we
It was everybody needs to be terrified.
Correct.
Yeah. And now you say, now what do you bring up October for? So we've talked about this on the podcast before, but in early October, the Great Barrington Declaration was published. 3 primary authors: Sinitra Gupta from Oxford University, Jay Bhattacharya from Stanford, and Martin Koldor from Harvard University. Renowned, experts as much or as equally qualified as Fauci to speak on these topics from prestigious universities, wrote the Great Barrington Declaration, which its main focus was advocating for what they called focus protection, which was exactly what you heard in that email. Protect the old, protect the infirmed. We know they have higher mortality rates, but let everybody else go out and continue, social distance and away from the infirmed groups as we work on vaccines, et cetera, et cetera. But let herd immunity basically work throughout the rest of the population that has very little risk of loss of life from this. Stated 2 or 3 times in that email, literally less than the flu for these other groups. Now, Fauci got this email in March. The Great Barrington Declaration was issued in October, 7 months later. When the declaration was issued, it was lambasted everywhere or ignored. You were a kook or a bad person if you gave focus protection any credence. There was no public debate over it at all, but yet at least somebody 7 months before that brought it to Fauci's attention, and all he had to say was thank you for your note as they pressed on with lockdowns and mandatory masks and everything that the last year was.
Can I press pause
Yes.
to go down a conspiratorial route?
I mean, we're going to get accused of it anyway, so let's go for it.
Right. So if you wanted to devalue all of the world's currency to get onto one currency, what would you do? You'd shut down a world and devalue all the world's currencies all at once, right?
I mean, that would be
globalization thing.
That'd be a pretty good
What's
step in
happening
the
to our
right
dollar
direction.
right now? Have you looked at the price of gas lately? Have you looked at the price of meat lately? Have you looked at the price of food lately?
Wood, bro.
Fucking homes. What's going on, dude?
Dude,
Like, how much money do you need to buy again, going back to that Germany reference, like they had a wheelbarrow full of Deutschmark, rolled it on up, and it couldn't even buy them a loaf of bread.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking at right now. And they're trying to write another bailout. And as we've covered on multiple different podcasts before this one, that $3 trillion bailout that they're trying to go again, if we need to remind you, just the most recent one that sticks out in my head is was it 26.8 or was it 28.6? I forget. $1 billion going to an orange grove in Ohio. An orange grove in Ohio. I don't know if you know about oranges or about temperate zones, but oranges don't grow in temperate zones. So I gotta tell you, they grow in tropics. So if you had an orange grove in Florida that got a $26.8 billion bailout, I would say, holy shit, is that the entire world's orange supply that we just lost? Because yes, give them that much, because I need some OJ in my and my Prosecco on Sundays for my brunch tasty treat. So absolutely throw all the money at that, because I don't want to have one little iota of my life change because of this disease. But if you're telling me that there's not orange groves as far as the eye can see in Ohio, then please, where did that money go?
Yeah, and I mean, for all those Orange Grove references, you're going to have to listen to last week's episode 46. We laid out the fraud, waste, and abuse for, the farm subsidies that were kept in the relief bills as, basically people passing them off as small businesses to get loans. But there was another report that was just published, or I saw it on Axios on Twitter, and so I shared it on the WMD_podcast Instagram. And the stat was, criminals may have stolen as much as half of the unemployment benefits the U.S. has been pumping out over the past year. With the bulk of it likely landing in foreign hands. 50%. And I said this in the post, and I think I speak for both of us, saying we are trying really, really hard to understand the mentality that the government should handle X, or if only the government had more money, then Y would be taken care of. We're really trying to understand that thought process, but I read this stuff and I'm just like, how? How do you continue to be that naive? I just want
to get one of them as a spokesperson for the entirety of the government since its inception to now. And I just want them to come out.
That's supposed to be Captain Trippy Steps right now.
And I just want them to come out with one program that legitimately, bar none,
works,
helped anybody.
Yeah.
That did it more efficiently than a private sector company could. Period. That's what I would love to. Whenever the government gets handed something, they'll say, well, we created 100 billion gazillion jobs last year. Yeah, picking stones for 2 cents an hour. That's not a job. That can't support
or you destroyed 1,000 billion gazillion
to create those resources 2 billion gazillions.
To create those jobs.
Exactly. Everything that they touch, they'll tell you the good things. They'll tell you the yin, but that yin is unfortunately the small little dot within the bigger encompassing black mark, which is their track record, that they had to kill everything else and pay off huge dividends to people that have paid them a lot of money, but they couldn't tell you that, so that they could screw over a multitude of other people to make your life a little bit better. So, again, anything the government gets their hands into just turns to absolute shite. And I can't believe it's taken this long for people to start realizing that.
Yeah. And getting back to the topic of, again, that email within the context of, what did Fauci know? When did he know it? What actions were taken and why? Clearly, there were at least people close enough in the administration to talk to Fauci himself to be 7 months ahead of the curve, right? I don't know when the experts that wrote the Great Barrington Declaration actually came up with their thesis, because like I said, I know it was signed in early October. Maybe they came up with their thesis earlier, but who knows? Maybe the person who wrote Fauci this email beat him to the punch and had the idea for how the lockdown should proceed, beat him by 7 months. Fauci just completely dismissed that as if that was an absurd notion. And then not only that, when the declaration came out 7 months later, it wasn't given an honest hearing. So I think those are rather important questions that we're entitled to. There's a lot of people that if they didn't lose their lives, lost an entire year of their life being locked in their home. It sounds trivial to some, like, oh, they didn't get their graduation, or oh, they, didn't get to bury their grandmother, or this, that, or whatever. I know that it
didn't affect you.
If somebody said that, then you would say they were being selfish, right? Especially if you are in the cult. But we're trying to say those aren't trivial things. Those are important life events that you'll never get back.
Right.
And so it's not just the loss of life. It's the loss of quality of life for everybody that had to withstand Fauci's regime. And it doesn't even appear that he even gave the other side an honest hearing.
But again, let's just take them at their face value. How they sold the first shutdown, the 2-week shutdown, how did they sell that? So that we wouldn't spread it any faster than it needed to spread, and so that we could set up emergency medical units to encompass the overflow of the sick people that we are going to get. And their projected deaths was 1 million within the first year, and that was if we were good, and 2 million is if it was really bad. Now,
I would say the projections were a bit high.
Let's look at what happened. We waited until September, October, and that's where it really kind of hit the peak in this country. And they were complaining about overflows within the hospital, with little to no mention about any of the emergency hospitals that they said they were going to set up within the 2-week span that they said we were going to be shut down, with little to no mention of all the other medical benefits they said they were going to make sure that happens within that 2 weeks. And then, to surmise that all, they didn't mention that their estimates of the deaths were, I think those estimates were by the first 6 months, by the way. So it was a doomsday cataclysmic thing.
I don't know their numbers intimately enough to be like what date by what time.
But I remember 1 million if we're
the projections were very high.
2 million if we're not.
Yes.
And it took a year and a half to get to 600. So even on the most and I'm not going to hold them to the 2 million, 1 million thing, because who could have known? But at the same time, this wasn't what it was, what they told us what it was, and they didn't do anything that they said they were going to do during that time, but they kept holding us accountable for doing what they told us to do.
Well, even more importantly than what they did or didn't do, we were told night and day, 24/7, that irresponsible states like Florida and Texas and, yada, 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 were going to completely screw up all the progress because we weren't being responsible, and it's going to be mass death, and we're going to export it to the rest of the country. So basically, all throughout this thing, we were being scolded that, as David said, 1 million in best case scenario, 2 million in worst case scenario. Well, then you got to judge them by their own rhetoric and go with the high end of that. We broke all the rules in Florida. We were completely open by September of 2020 and never closed back down. So, when you judge the states that heavily locked down by the states that didn't, you get this kind of scatter plot where like Florida's right in the middle. It's like 27th out of the 50 states.
By the way, how
cases,
are we doing
deaths, et cetera, et cetera.
By the way?
Right, much better. But the point that I'm trying to make is that even at their worst case scenario, which we allegedly violated all of, still hit as many deaths we did. And again, that's not us poo-pooing the number of COVID. Every life lost from COVID is just as sad as a life that was lost as a result of the policies that were instituted for COVID.
All we're saying is they've been wrong on every aspect of this and have taken zero accountability for anything.
Yes. And on that zero accountability, this is, the kind of point that I wanted to wrap this whole thing up with, is I think that after reading through just that one email, and again, it doesn't have to be a smoking gun, and we're not saying it is, but what we are saying is that information that Fauci knew, when he found out about it, what actions he took, and why, are rather important, especially in light of what he said this last week. I forget who was interviewing him, but I'm paraphrasing, but this is the gist of his quote was, "Their attacks on me are basically an attack on science. In total Messiah complex, Fauci has made himself synonymous with science." I forget there's a quote, but it goes something along like, find out who you can't criticize. And that's exactly, the one that has all the power. If you can't criticize him, if criticizing him and saying, dude, why didn't you acknowledge this email and why didn't you give it an honest hearing in the policy debates? Why didn't you tell the people what this person had to say to you? If you can't criticize that without being a quote unquote anti-science, anti-vaxxer, then the power is not sitting in quote unquote we the people's hands.
And if you need any more exploration, if you think we're being too hard on Fauci, that he's trying to do his best job, I advise you to look up the Fauci versus Rand Paul debate, when Rand Paul basically asks him, are these masks theater because you follow the science and your science says that your vaccines are 95% effective and 100% effective in not dying from it? And he didn't have any answer to that. He was all shoulders.
No,
but he was mask all the way up until it. And then a week later,
backed out of it by saying variants. That was his argument.
In a week later, well, that's the moving of the goalposts.
I know.
Well, I'm sure we'll talk.
I'm saying he had an answer.
But a week later, all of a sudden, you don't have to wear a mask if you've been vaccinated. So he got called out on his shit. And then because he didn't want to lose face, definitely backtracked and went with quote unquote the science that he obviously is the Messiah of. But it takes Satan to come up to you, Jesus, and tell you what you're doing wrong.
In that instance, I wonder if, because again, that guidance came from the CDC. So I wonder if the regime didn't go over even Fauci's head because they realize it's no longer politically advantageous when a critical mass of people are just saying, I'm not doing it anymore. But, David is exactly right on the timeline, is that Rand asked him about the masks. His excuse for the masks was variants. You got to keep that on because even though people got the vaccine, a variant can completely circumvent that. Okay, fine. We'll take that as far as it goes. Not just a couple weeks later, the CDC says, no, you don't need a mask anymore if you're vaccinated and you're outside. So I didn't hear Fauci shouting from the rooftops about variants at that point. Something within the 4 to 6 weeks between the Rand Paul exchange and the CDC guidance, variants were no longer a concern.
And by the way,
maybe they went over his head. Maybe he was a part of that call. But at any rate, you got a quick change in policy with virtually no explanation.
With this gentleman Fauci, Messiah Fauci of the coronavirus, Saint Fauci of the coronavirus. In all this year and a half, how many times has he come out and said that diet, exercise, vitamin D, and just general health, or adherence to a diet and health and a regulatory approach to becoming healthier is a great way to circumvent the most dire symptoms of this disease? How many times did you hear that from Saint Fauci himself?
I don't recall once, but again, I could have just missed it. But I don't. Right.
It might have been on an 11 p.m. news break that he said it like under his breath, maybe. But all I'm saying is
it wasn't headline news.
The average weight gain within this country was 2 to 3 pounds per month of quarantine, which means that the quarantine made us more unhealthy, which made us more susceptible to the virus that he was trying to protect us from.
Right. And what, 70+%? I don't know the exact number, but 70+% were either overweight or obese?
78% of all hospitalizations were from obese patients.
COVID hospitalization. Right?
Correct. COVID hospitalization.
Yeah, I mean, that's a rather important health fact.
And then mortality rate, 2.8 comorbidities with each death of COVID. So like you're saying that already sick people were dying from COVID.
Yeah, and here's the thing, folks. We're not armchair quarterbacking, 14, 16 months later. These arguments were being made by the Sinitra Guptas and the Jay Bhattacharya's and the Martin Koldorfs, et cetera.
Trust us, we're not that smart.
Yeah, we're not. And that's actually kind of one of the things that's more frustrating about it. It's the fact that we know we're not that smart. That if we can, we acknowledge that there was another school of thought out there. There wasn't just one monolithic thing that you had to agree with, and if you didn't, you were anti-science. That there were legitimate experts in those fields and scientists who disagreed and were not plastered all over CNN. They weren't put in the debates with Fauci about which way the policy should go. They were just completely ignored, dismissed, or kookified, if that's a word.
They were make one up. They were labeled, and as soon as you labeled them,
exactly. You could dismiss them. Exactly.
Throw them away.
So that's the deal. What really comes out when all of the emails are synthesized and we get that chronological, clearer picture. And I guess then it's up to the individual whether it's a quote unquote smoking gun or not. We're not here to put our flag in the smoking gun camp or out of it. But we're saying that there's probably some valuable information here and there's probably a valuable global picture of the situation, and it's worth digging into. And no, digging into it doesn't mean that you hate the entire concept of science. That's absurd.
In fact, if you ever go to a science convention, all it is conflict. All it is them picking apart.
The point of science, constant questioning.
Them picking apart every little thing that you did wrong in their eyes, and you trying to uphold your scientific method to them. And if it withstands the rigorous attempts to break it down and it's still valid at the end of it, that's science. But that's what we've been hearkening on this whole time, is that when you just say, it's the science, it's like science takes years, upon decades, upon millennia. We still don't have science figured out. Newton's laws we're still debunking today, or fine-tuning at least. Like, science is ever evolving and always changing. So for you to say that you've got the science figured out in 2 weeks and I need to adhere to it,
you're sus, bro. You're saying that, you're sus, bro.
You're just a weak-spined American, and you are the reason why this country is failing. Can I say that?
I think you can.
Is that fair enough?
I think that's allowed.
Okay.
That's general and broad enough attack on an entire group of people that I think you can get away with it.
I'm not going to get sued for defamation of character on anybody.
I think you're good on that one.
Just stop being a pussy, all right? The first rule of America: don't tell other countries about America. Second rule about America: don't tell other countries about America. Third rule: don't be a pussy.
Great. Now we're going to be called misogynists. Anyway.
Perfect.
You can find this episode at wmdpodcast.com/47. Search Weapons of Meme Destruction on YouTube, Google to find us on any podcast catcher, YouTube, and all the socials. With that being said, we're going to see you sexy ladies and gentlemen next Monday, right?
Next Monday.
That's when they're going to hear the next episode after this one.
Oh.
This one is coming out this Monday. We record
these on Friday. These timelines are so confusing. Is it Patrick Stewart or McElroy? These timelines are so confusing.
All right. So you'll hear this one this Monday, and 48 will be coming out at you the following Monday.
There you go.
When I say this Monday and they're listening to it on Monday, they're going to be very confused. Anyway, doesn't matter. I'm going to stop talking now. Should we listen to David play some metal in your face? Whatever you do, don't doubt Fauci. With that, over now.